Hello, everyone. My name is Rami. I'm a security solutions architect here at BugCrowd, and I'll be hosting today's Ask a Hacker Anything with Erik de Jong. Can everybody hear me all right before we get started? Would love to see some answers in the comments. Excellent. Thank you all for joining today. So today we are joined by Erik de Jong. I have had the pleasure of knowing Erik for quite a few years now, being good friends for a while. Erik is a fantastic hardware hacker, usually the go-to person when I have questions, and definitely one of the sweetest people I ever meet. He's done some pretty cool things with BugCrowd. He's done all sorts of things like pen tests, uh, bounties, specialized hardware engagements, and live hacking events as well. I won't steal too much of the thunder. So Erik, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as Rami said, we've known each other for a couple of years by now. We've done some great stuff together for Bug Crowd as well. Um, where to start? I've been hacking for way too long because I was always like really interested in how stuff worked, and I sort of broke a lot of things when I was a kid, just trying to figure out what was inside. Um, so that's where I got started really. And then um, I studied electrical engineering in college, which was sort of the gateway to really understanding stuff like hardware and also like operating system design and system libraries, which is the stuff I love to do for Bugcrowd most of the time. Low level stuff, hardware stuff, and that's I guess that's sort of my thing by now. I also I do have knowledge about exploiting web vulnerabilities as well, but I don't actively go looking for them unless there's some kind of penetration test type thing involved.
Cool. That's awesome to hear. So we've spoken about hardware a couple times. Is there a certain type of vulnerability or a class you look for? When I think of you in hardware, I usually think of things like routers.
Yeah, because of my employment history, I've been working with network devices a lot, and I really love ones and zeros traveling through a wire. I'm kind of nerdy that way. Um, I've also done some some code contribution to Wireshark, for instance. I really know my way around packet analysis. So yeah, networking devices are my go-to thing, and I really love just reverse engineering communication protocols, and then once you've worked out how to manipulate the protocol, then you can look for vulnerabilities in how it's implemented, in hardware or in software, depending on the target platform. And I think, especially for like the bug crowd submissions, I guess that's like 75% of my submissions is related to this, like hardware targets, especially network devices. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So you mentioned you did electrical engineering in college. How did you end up doing bug bounties or pen tests with BugCrowd? That's not the
Uh,
typical story I mostly hear, at least.
well, when I studied in college, there was like a around that time there was like a tipping point in accessibility for like hardware stuff. Like the Arduino got on the market. So um, when I was in high school and I was playing around with microcontrollers, it was really hard to work with because you had to read all the data sheets and you had to fiddle with all the like configuration fuses, and it was a nightmare to work with. And then stuff like Arduino became available, and it was as easy as just programming C to interface with hardware. And also around that time, like Raspberry Pi got released, Raspberry Pi 1. And I was, during my college time, I was working on embedded Linux systems for like a work placement assignment. And I still got to taste like the old world without Raspberry Pis, where you just flash up SD card and got going. I had to fight with like board support packages, which were basically like, here's a Linux kernel, good luck, rather than having everything documented. So I had to really get down to details to work with that, and to run. If I wanted to run a newer kernel on the board, I had to you know um, figure out how to patch the kernel source from a ancient kernel that wasn't really related to the current kernel. So it was really hard work, really down to details. And then I got after college, I went to work for an MSP where I did lots of networking and stuff like that. So I got my hands on lots of network devices to play with, and then gradually over time, you just start to see like, okay, I'm supposed to use it in this way. What happens if I just change a setting just for fun? It's not maybe not really important for the job at hand, but let's just see what happens. And that's how I sort of got into that whole networking, finding vulnerability space. Because I did do like find software vulnerabilities before. I did stuff like I wrote some key generators when I was younger as well. Like, but that's all pure software. That's not really connected to hardware at all. But so once I got into like the hardware side of hacking, um, I found a vulnerability in a certain platform, and um, there was a vendor, and they were like, "Well, very nice that you report this to us. We have a program on Bugcrowd. Why don't you log on to there, and we'll get you a bounty and get everything set up?" Because before that, vendors that I've interacted with, they were really sort of trying to downplay issues. They were like, yeah, but it's on an administrative interface, so it's not that important, or they were just plainly ignoring me. And that sort of gave me a bad taste for getting in touch with vendors. But that vendor that got me onto Bugcrowd, they were really amazing, because I found a couple of more bugs in the hardware I had at hand. And after that, they were like, well, we have other products as well. Why don't you have a go at this? And then they were sharing virtual machines with me that I could hack on. And then they started sending me hardware, because they were like, yeah, you have very old hardware. You can't run the latest software on it. Let's get you something new, and you can run our newer code as well. And suddenly I was like, whoa, I feel like getting in over my head. And I had to really take a step back and make a decision if I wanted to be really professional about that, or just, hack a little bit for fun. And I chose to do it very structured. I set up a Jira instance where I just logged everything I found and made sure I tracked everything, especially after fixes were announced. I had to evaluate the fixes and everything. And especially for hardware platforms, it tends to take longer. So if you have a website and you find some sort of vulnerability, it will be patched in a day or so, because it's really dangerous or whatever. But when you're looking at hardware with vendors that have millions of units out in the field, they can't just write a patch and push it, because they have integrators working with that that need to push those fixes. So it's a very different process, and they have so much QA that they need to do as well. Because what if we write a patch that breaks something that thousands of customers are using? So they can't risk that. So it's a much longer process, and you need to be really structured about it. It means maybe report a vulnerability today, get a fix in half a year if it's not critical. So you need to get your admin right in order to keep track of everything.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I often see the hardware vulnerabilities with CPUs the most, at least just from my personal experience. And or like one of the old iPhones I was looking at jailbreaking the other day, and that's just how it is. They're not gonna let me return an old iPhone. That's really cool to hear. So, if you were starting bug bounties today, hardware, software, web, crypto, whatever it might be, what tips would you give a new bounty hunter?
Um, I think it's probably really frustrating to get started, especially if you don't have a lot of knowledge up front. But you know, I think the best advice is that you need to keep going. You should never like give up after you receive, I don't know, a duplicate or something is marked as informational or whatever. Any comment you get back, you need to think about it, why you got that back, and use that to get better. Um, Especially because I like to only go for high impact bugs. So for bug that would be like P1 or P2. I don't want to go for anything below that because the bounties are usually not that big, so it's not that interesting to me. And also because I really like to think about things like what's the impact of a bug I found, and if the impact's really small, I don't really care about it. I guess I just want to find the worst things. So if you get feedback that something is informational or it's like before or whatever, maybe you need to think back to see if like, okay, did I miss something? Can I make it a higher impact? Or can I prove why it's dangerous rather than say this is a potential account takeover? Prove that it's an account takeover because it's it's really hard to for triage or for customers to take your words that it's bad unless you can prove it. And if they can't find a way to verify that, yes, you can take an account over, uh, there's not a lot of value in there. Nobody wants to pay for a maybe bug. It needs to be good. Um, I do have some experience from the other side as well, where I look at responsible disclosure reports and stuff like that. And yeah, it's very annoying for a customer to get information where it's like, okay, this is a report that somebody copy pasted from somewhere, and they've just put in a different URI related to an asset that belongs to you, and it's just useless stuff like missing rate limit on logout or something. That's not useful. It's great that you found that. It could be a bug. Maybe it's by design, but there's no impact there. So, and be ready to accept comments like that because, if you want to grow, you need to learn how to get better impact bugs.
Absolutely. I think you hit a really good point there. Not getting discouraged by things like duplicates either. I always remind people that a duplicate is still a valid bug. It is, you
Yeah,
just
exactly.
weren't the
Yeah.
first person to report it, but that doesn't mean you did anything bad or wrong. Or unfortunately, if it was a bounty program, you won't get paid, but it means you're on the right track and it's still something
That's
positive to go through. So
yeah.
you mentioned being a program owner. As a program owner, what do you typically like to see in a report that helps you? Reproduce it. You mentioned a lot about impact. What really makes a good report to you?
Um, yeah, I think like yeah, impact is of course number one because that's what you're wanting to pay for as a customer. But also a report needs to be clear. There should be no discussion or no like maybe I need to try something and play with it to get anything from it. It needs to be clear and concise. My personal style, I write exploit because actually I think of myself more like an exploit developer. So I write exploits. You get a nice Python script and you run it and it does something rather than you open burp and then you send it to a repeater and change this field to it's you know not all customers are used to the tools that hackers use. And if if I go to like a regular software engineer, they're not going to have burp suite installed. So you need to make it really easy to reproduce. Very clear, no discussion about it. I'd say that impact and a good description, that's really the way to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely what I hear from most program owners. We have a few questions in the comments. Please keep sending them, and I'll ask Eric some of them. So someone I really wanted to ask here. So you've done quite a few pen tests for BugCrowd. That's actually how we met. Um, what's a go-to tool you use when running an internal pen test? Uh, in the comments, so they say like GoBuster. Um, every pen test is different, but do you have a go-to tool? I'm sure Burp Suite is one of them. Um,
Yeah, you can't really go without that these days. Like I said, I don't do web, but I do need to get a Burp Pro license because you just need to have that. Um, I think I used to go for Durbuster a lot, and recently I've been looking out, to move to GoBuster. But apart from the pen testing, I don't use a lot of automated tooling. So I've just got my standard workflow for pen testing, which is, run some nmaps and then do Durbuster or GoBuster or a combination of the both of them for enumeration. But yeah, tools wise, I'm a pretty much a manual man, I'd say.
we that's I do see a big divide in bounty hunters. I do still talk to quite a few. Um, do you find uh, you achieve greater results using manual tooling or manual methods per se?
Yeah, it works better for the workflow that I use because I prefer to have like a white box type of engagement. So I want to know what's happening behind the curtains and work with that. So for instance, I did a test. I think 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember, but they were like, okay, here's a web servers, and you can look at it. And I was like, okay, but can you share the code with me because it was some sort of Java deployed thing? So it's like maybe you can send me the Java files and I can work more effective. And apparently that was not possible. So I had to look for an RCE and then I downloaded all the files and I just did it white box anyway because I like to work that way. So like stuff like brute forcing or scanning, I use the basic tools, and that's just really it for me. But on the other hand, I know there's a lot of people, and they have like very cool automated setups where they just enter a domain or some IP prefix or whatever, and they go for a coffee, and then they come back and they have results that they need to go through. And like guys like Swink or something, they're really into that, and they've really got it down to a point where it's pretty much perfect. But to me, I feel like I can't build a system that's better than a system that guys have been working on for maybe 5 years. I don't feel I can bridge that gap, especially since it's not, my primary target to work on web.
Absolutely. It's always interesting. There's the people who enjoy building the process to automate, and then I find it the other way. Some hunters will just say to me, "I use the repeater tab in Burp Suite, and that's it. That's all
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do." And I'm like, "Nothing
yeah,
else? No plugins? No nothing?" And they're like, "No, just repeater." And I just keep playing until I find something.
yeah. That's me. Yeah. But it's good. It's nice to have people with like totally different approaches, and you're going to cover more of the spectrum in that way. So customers win in the end if you have people with different skill sets.
Cool. So I'm going to switch gears a bit. And you wrote a guide breaking into embedded Linux systems. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. So um, this is interesting because over the years, whenever I talk with people and I tell them like I like to do hardware hacking, embedded systems and everything, everybody's always asking like, how do I get started in that? And yeah, for me, it was like, okay, but I've learned all this stuff over the years, so it's like easy, I guess. I'm used to it. But for a newbie, it's got to be really daunting to work on that. So I figured like, if I ever have time to make content, I'd like to build a virtual system that people can run in an emulator and they can, get to grips with the basics on that. And like a couple of months after I had that thought, Buckrout was like, "Can you make some content for us?" So I was like, "Yeah, let's do this." And I built my virtualized Swagregator machine to work on. And I was like, "Okay, let's start with the basics. You know, do what I do, which is usually I get a box and I plug it in. It boots up, and hopefully it gets an IP address or something." And then I log in and I just start playing around with the environment that I meet, which is what we replicate in the guide. Basically, there's a command line style interface where you can run some basic commands like ping, ps, stuff like that. And what I'd like to do from there is, okay, so it's time to get a foothold, I want to get into the system so I can start running debug tools and whatever to further exploit things, which don't require login because, higher impact, no login, obviously. So what we did in the guide was first start to meet the Swagregator system, play around in the command line interface for a bit, and I put some subtle hints in there like, okay, maybe there's a way to abuse this by command injection or something. So, and then I sort of zoom out and we uh, open Ghidra and we start to do some static analysis because I'd say like 9 out of 10 times whenever there's a device to look at, you're always going to be able to access firmware in some way or other. And, as I said, I like to work at a white box. So I like to take the firmware and do some analysis on that. So in the guide, we open it up and, start to sort of go through the basic steps. Like, okay, these are some of the tabs you have in Ghidra, some basic workflow things. And we just start to analyze what this really basic command line interface does. And from there on, apparently, it becomes apparent that we can do some command injection. And we just work at it purely from the theory from what we see in Ghidra. Once we're there, I help to compose a payload. And I thought it would be nice to put in some minor hurdles. I think you weren't allowed to have spaces in there and stuff like that. And that's like the tricks of the trade that you need to know, because you can have command injection, but to exploit it, it's getting a bit trickier because people start to put limitations on there, like no spaces or no some character or other that you need to work with. So with some theorized payloads, we run it on the virtualized system, and yeah, you can get a shell from that. So that's basically my first steps in my workflow to attack any hardware devices. I try to get shell authenticated or whatever way possible. And from that shell, we shall then work backwards to do something to find vulnerabilities where you don't need authentication, which are like CVSS 9.5 to 10 type vulnerabilities, which are way interesting.
That's really cool. I was just showing that on the stream for everybody. Feel free to go check it out. I believe it's on the Level Up X section of our website, or you can find it through our social media.
Yeah.
It was really fun to actually walk through that. I got a bit of a sneak peek. Uh, Definitely learned quite a bit, and probably gave Eric a few too many messages. Um,
Well,
but I
it's
really
friendly
encourage
cookie
everyone to give it a
testing.
go.
But yeah, it was really cool to write that, and there's definitely going to be a follow up I'm working on where we're moving to other subsystems on the virtual device, which are more challenging.
Great. And you said this is typically kind of your first few steps of what you would do when hunting on a program or performing a pen test.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'd like to do white box as much as possible, so I need to get a debugger in there or run any scripts that I'd like. So yeah, that's my first step.
Fantastic. There was a question in the comments I wanted to read out um, from Cowboy Bebop 8024. How do you increase your skill set in an ever-changing field of cybersecurity? How do you keep yourself up to date?
Well, obviously hunting helps because it's like a sixth sense that you start to develop where you're going to be like, there's something there. I need to dig down, dig deeper. And often you'll find that, okay, so I tried all the standard tools in my toolbox, but I don't get impact or don't get past some sort of limitation. And that's where you need to, you don't need to just give up. You need to work on it. And by working on it, that means research. That can be stuff like reading man pages. If it's especially if it's like a OS based thing, you can just read manual pages about libc or other libraries to understand how stuff works deep down at a lower level. That's really useful. And one of the other things I don't really like to do online labs where you can learn something. So what I do, I just go to a vendor like hp.com and I just download some virtual machines that they have that that's included in their customer products, and I just install that and I just work at that. Just try and find vulnerabilities in there, see how it works, because um, inter-process communication is also a really interesting subject. And if you're going to be working on embedded systems, that's also something to look out for. So you definitely want to just just do the work, I guess, until you find stuff. And Google is a great friend to get you started on the way,
Google is
or ask other
definitely
hackers as well.
definitely a key. Do you follow anything online? Do you use Twitter? Are you involved in any communities? Like I know a lot of people like Discord. I'm personally someone who leans more on Twitter or X. I know a lot of people like LinkedIn as well. How do you keep up
Yeah,
to date?
I'm not so super involved, or not as involved as I'd like to be on platforms like that. I do follow stuff like hacker news and things like that. That's always, but that's more broadly about other subjects as well. Um, but yeah, I think I use LinkedIn a lot because I also have a professional life outside of bug bounty where it's useful to know what's going on. Um, and conferences are also a great source of information, and just talking to people. Um, Because in the end, you always need to have like your little black book of people, where if I have a question about this, well, I need to get in touch with that person to ask for help, because that's a great way to get skills. And hackers are in general really happy to share, which is good. Just like I'd like to share the level up thing, or do sessions like this. It's great to share because we learn by working together.
Absolutely. We were right before we jumped onto the live stream. We were just saying how I was saying to Eric how almost odd it is that hackers are so willing and freely sharing things, and they'll just tell you, "Here's everything I know," and there's no gatekeeping, no nothing. They're just happy to share, happy for people to learn, and happy to see the industry grow. And I always think that's such a unique thing to the infosec and cybersec world.
Yeah, I do. I do have to say that I've seen that there's this thing happening where people are offering courses about bug hunting or stuff like that, where I do have my doubts about doing it that way. I think it's the sort of thing where somebody's really good at something, and then apparently they need to monetize telling people how great they are at that. But yeah, I don't know. Feels like that's not the way to go about stuff. I wouldn't personally pay for courses to increase my skill set if I can find a lot of good quality information for free by friendly hackers that share it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone has a different learning style. I was never great at programming, and I tried taking courses, free, paid, certification, and it just didn't click for me. And all these years later, having a need to create something with code has personally been how I have found the best way of learning for myself. It could be something just from automating something at home, or just in your daily life, or it could be to find a vulnerability. And I found um, learning with a end goal and purpose in mind rather than just to learn has been beneficial to me. They always say like you should go to the gym and go running. It's good for you. Yes, sure, okay, but I'm sure I'm going to run a lot faster if there's a bear chasing after me. Um, and
Yeah,
that's how
yeah,
I have found my way of learning to be personally.
yeah, yeah. That's definitely learning by doing is the way I like it. Also, that's probably a quirky thing about me is that I don't really like learning from videos. I prefer to read because I can read faster than people talk in videos, and I can sort of dwell on interesting sections for a bit longer. But maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah, I always take the double-sided approach of I want the video and a blog post. Um, often something I'll say is I love the video. Can I have a written article too? And vice versa. Speaking of, you did prepare a document for this stream. Would you like to talk about it some
Yeah,
more? I'll throw it up on
yeah,
the screen.
definitely. All right, yeah. Let me start with like an introduction to it. So, like I said, people are always asking how to get started in hardware hacking. The Level Up article details more software side of things, but hardware is also about hardware, obviously. And people are really concerned about tooling because as soon as you look at hardware, people think that you need expensive tooling because you need to have a SMD rework station and microscopes and whatever. I think if you want to get started with this and you're willing to put in some effort, it shouldn't be necessary to get really expensive tools. So I've prepared some images to show a really quick and easy and very cheap way to look at PCB reverse engineering. Can you show it on screen, Romy?
Finding the unmute button is always a fun time. It's showing on the screen to the stream. We're currently
Oh,
on
okay.
the top and bottom PCB shots. I probably should have mentioned that prior to jumping on the stream with you. Um,
No
so
problem. No problem.
everyone right now
Okay.
can see the top and bottom ones.
Yeah. So what we have here, let me I have it here on screen as well. So this is a PCB from a consumer inkjet printer, a couple of years old, not very special in any way, but it's useful to demonstrate some easy techniques to get started with PCB reverse engineering. So what I did here is I took two photos of the PCB, the top side and the bottom side, and I loaded them in GIMP um, on two different layers, but I put them on top of each other so I can see them both at the same time. And I've mirrored the bottom one, so it makes more sense to me when I look at both to match them up. And as you can see on on the right, I've also added some GIMP layers in there for tagging components and writing down any information about sort of certain types of subsystems and components as well. So if we move over to the next page.
There we are. We're on the second page.
Okay, so I've really roughly marked out some sections on the board that might be of interest. So we have a RAM chip, there's a CPU chip, there's also a flash memory chip, which probably holds firmware, so that's really interesting. At the right, there's also a connection to a Wi-Fi board. That's something you see very often in like electronics these days, is that stuff like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, they're not always embedded on a main board. That's partly because it's quicker to develop, work on new versions of your main board without having to go through the FCC every time because of the radio stuff on the Wi-Fi board. And maybe it's just cheaper to get off-the-shelf Wi-Fi boards that you can just connect to your main board. Then on the other side, on the bottom side, there's I've marked out a JTAG connector. Actually, there were two in this example. There were some switch footprints which weren't populated. That's the N reset and N reflash squares. And there were some serial pads right on the board here. They were marked in the silk screen, so that was really a easy way to identify them. But other ways to sort of find out who's who about the components on the board is looking at shapes, because the flash memory chips, they have a very distinctive shape. You look at pin footprints, and as in the detail right at the bottom, trace shape also gives away some stuff. This is a close-up of the RAM chip, and you can see that they've made sure that all the traces have the same length by letting them run around in little S shapes. This is also something you could see when you deal with RF boards, because they are really finicky about stuff like that. But these are all indicators about like what kind of a thing am I looking at here. If we then go to the next page, you can see that I've just used like the pencil tool in GIMP, and I've started marking out PCB traces. If you have a photograph with, you need to have a photograph with good lighting, but if you have that, and you can zoom in a bit in your image editing program, you can definitely trace these traces with the pencil tool, or if they're really good quality, you can just fill the traces, because they have a good distinction between them and the rest of the PCB. So side, the top and the bottom plane. And in this case, the vias were just going from the top onto the bottom, and I could continue tracing the PCB traces from there. Of course, these were JTAG connectors were already brought out, so it could solder onto them right onto the board. But for other components, it could be a useful way to get interface with them. If we go to the next page, we have a close-up of the flash memory chip. And in this case, I've managed to dump the flash memory contents right from the board. So people are always very scared about, what if I want to dump flash memory? I need to get a hot air station, and I need to remove the memory chip, and I need to get an expensive reader and put it in there and then read it, and hope I don't break the board when I put it back. If you're lucky, you might be able to just do it in circuit when it's still on the board, like I did in this example. So to do that, I would mark the interesting pins and tried to see if I could follow traces from them. In this example, it worked for a couple of the pins, but not all were, easily visible where they went. And then what I did was I also marked some vias nearby, which had a very distinctive pattern. And I used that to find the vias connected to the flash memory chip on the other side of the PCB. Because, for the JTAG, it was really easy to find them because they were very clear. They were not surrounded by 1,000 other vias. But for the flash memory chip, this was more tricky. So I, used some points of reference, which have the red circles around them here, in order to map it to the other side of the board. If we then go to the next page, you will see that I've marked those reference points as well. And then I can really easily find where I went. And I was able to get the I/O pins of the flash memory chip here. And we were very lucky because there were test points there where you could just solder onto with even a very cheap soldering iron. You don't need to get expensive stuff to do this. It's just easy. And with all the IOs and some control pins, which I didn't work out on this image, but they were also connected to test points, so it was not a big difficulty to do that. But with all those things wired up, you can just get like a normal flash memory reader to read the chip, or you can even just bit bang this from a Raspberry Pi. So once again, you don't need a $100 flash memory reader with 1,000 different converter boards to read your memory chip. If you're lucky, you could just get a Raspberry Pi, GIMP, and a cheap soldering iron, and you can do this at home. There's really no reason why you wouldn't want to try this, because it's fun. You would learn new skills. If we move on to the next page, then we can see just some other traces marked out as well. There were some serial lines which I've traced for the switches. I've traced some pads as well. And in the end, I think I didn't fully work out what this board did because I got enough information already. But if you have the traces in view, you can definitely work this out. And then finally, on the last page, you can see the Frankenstein printer with lots of wires coming out. I built like a little proto board thingy with some connectors for like serial ports, the JTAG, the reset button, which was also useful, so I could just reset the machine. And on the other image, you see like a little breakout board that I connected to my flash memory reader. But like I said, you could just hook it up to a Pi and read it with that. Real easy. Yeah, so that was like a 5-minute intro into PCB reverse engineering. And I think if you're a hacker, if you're into the hacker mindset, anybody can have a go at this. It's not complicated, as long as you don't go looking at laptop main boards, because obviously these are way more difficult than just a printer PCB.
Absolutely. I'm definitely gonna order that soldering iron now. Um, in the comments, it's been asked, what bands are these running on?
Wait, what?
What bands are these running on?
Bands?
Bands. In relation to the PCB. Maybe they can expand in the comments for us. While we do that, if anyone has any questions they'd like to post in the comments, we have maybe 5-10 minutes left. In the meantime, Erik, if people wanted to follow you online, where could they find you?
So yeah, like I said, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. You can find me there really easy. I think it's also linked in my background profile as well. People could also walk up to me at Hardware IO next week because I'll be there. If you're in the Netherlands, hook me up, no problem. Um, yeah, so on Twitter, I'm just a read-only person, so I don't really do a lot with that. I'm on Bug Crowd Slack as well. I'm on the Bug Bounty Forum Slack, which is also very popular about for bounty hunters, I guess. Um, so yeah, that would be a way to get in touch with me. Don't really do a lot of Discord. Found it's there's just way too much going on there, and I can't keep track of it, and then I sort of lose interest.
Definitely feel that way. The to clarify the earlier question, what RF bands, radio frequency bands, are they running on?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so this was for a printer. So there was the Wi-Fi board was just for like I think 2.4, but because they use a daughter board, um, the communication from the CPU to the daughter board is just some sort of serial connection. Um, don't have the protocol ready just right now, but that means there's no RF stuff happening on the main board of the printer. It's only happening on the daughter board.
Interesting. Fantastic. Um, Lastly, any final tips and tricks for um, bug bounty hunters, what to do next? Maybe an unorthodox tip you might have.
Well, I always like to say that you need to learn new things just for learning them because they might be useful in the long run. I think I've said this on Buckcrab before, but stuff like learning regular expressions, that feels like maybe if you're not using that in work or education environments or whatever, it feels like a chore to learn that. But there's actually really good reference material for that. What's the website again?
I think Regex 101, I think.
No, there's a really cool site. It's like Regex Crossword or something, and you learn by doing. But in like they make like crosswords where you need to enter content that matches a certain regular expression. It's a really easy way to get started with it. It's fun to do. Um, so yeah, that's something you should definitely learn because it's just fun to do and it's useful because when you're hacking, you will want to search for stuff and match stuff. So regular expressions are a great tool in the toolbox. And like I said, I think of myself more like an exploit developer. And yeah, if you can exploit something with a burp plugin, maybe you could try and write an exploit to do it by yourself. So you can get some exposure to coding and you can sort of understand what's happening under the hood. Because it's like they teach you in school, like you need to do math in your head before you can use a calculator. And it's the same sort of thing. If you just use a tool and you only know how to use a tool, you don't really understand what's happening and you can't find new fault conditions to exploit.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed a lot of the hackers that I talk to, um, they do use some tooling, but then they usually go and, if it's something like open source, they'll go and fork it and add to it and make it their own and give it their own kind of flavor. Nuclear is talked about a lot, and something
Yeah.
or at least I tend to see, is that the people who usually get nuclei findings are the ones who have made their own templates that aren't readily available, um, and it's for their own stuff. They've just used the engine to do it. Um,
Yeah.
Comment in the sorry, question in the comments. Which certification should you go for first? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, so I did the offensive security ones. I got like OSCP and OSWE. Um, it, I would say when I did those, I was at a point where I didn't learn a lot of new stuff, but OSCP really helps me to put in perspective um, how useful my exploits are, in the sense of like a malicious attacker. Because, like I said before, maybe a vendor is going to be playing down an issue because they say, yeah, but you need to have access to an admin interface to use it. But take for instance network equipment. If I somehow got access to that admin portal and you were just using admin as a username password, then from that point I could manipulate your whole network and do whatever I wanted. And that makes a really small detail like using admin and having an unpatched device a really potentially very dangerous thing. And that's what OSCP taught me, because it's all about like you don't need to develop any exploits. You can be using public stuff from exploit DB and stuff like that. But it's also about finding information and bringing it all together. So it helped me to put that into perspective. And I'd say OSCP is definitely, if you've obtained that, you've proven that you can do pen testing. OSWE is a bit different. It's I was taking that hoping to get more insight into exploiting web applications, but I found it was really very much about a white box approach, which was already like my favorite way to do this. Um, but if you're usually just brute forcing scanning or whatever, definitely have a look at OSWE, because it's going to help you to look at it from a white box perspective and really focus on that impact thing, which we talked about earlier. So both are, yeah, they're really good certifications to get. And if I were on the hiring committee, I would definitely, recommend a person with those certifications, because yeah, they know what to do. They have had boots on the ground. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. Thank you, Eric, for taking time out of your day to chat with me and answer some questions in the webinar. Um, if you would like to find out more about Eric or BugCrowd, you can jump to our website or our socials. Eric has been featured a couple of times on the blog. He's written some great material, as you've got to see today. And you can find all this out first on our social media as well. So thank you all so much. Have a great morning, evening, night, wherever you are in the world, and keep hacking.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.